House, wonderful to be with you guys. Last time I was here was like 3 weeks before the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which is pretty cool. So my first time back at Freedom House since the high places of Moloch started crumbling, and the woke pastors in big evangelicalism told us not to beat our chest in a celebration of a victory in the culture war. You got to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. This was really hard. So we're grateful at our church that Roe v. Wade got overturned, but this was a real gut punch into the stomach of the Moloch serviles, secular humanists, atheists. And the scripture tells you to weep with those who weep. So we're not going to celebrate this because that's hard for the people who have become accustomed to having orgasms without responsibility. That's really hard for them. And I just feel like sometimes like, where is that in the Bible? Like, I feel like King David chops off the head of Goliath and then whoa, lifts it up, and Goliath's guts and blood is just pouring all over David's head like a shower. And he's like, glory to you, God. And then do you know what happened right after that? Have you read that passage, church? Well, no, you don't. So Rick Warren and Ed Stetzer and Andy Stanley walked up to him and said, David, that's not very winsome. The other side, they're really demoralized right now. The Philistines are really hurting right now. Now go lay your hands on and pray for the Philistine brethren. And all David can do is glory to you, God. Roe v. Wade getting overturned was the closest thing to chopping off the head of Goliath since modernity ruined the Western civilization that we're living in. And we should be like David and give glory to God and not apologize for standing for and celebrating righteousness when the Lion of the tribe of Judah is on the move once again. So that's why I'm so grateful for this church, and I love Troy and Penny and the entire team here because they're so honest. When I met Troy and Penny, they told me, you know what, 2018, 2019, we weren't that outspoken on some of these issues. And they've said that from the pulpit, they're very honest. And boy, we got a fire lit under us. And we realized when BLM and Antifa started burning down the country, and it was mostly peaceful, and then Kamala Harris started tweeting out fundraising links to pay the bail of the rioters. But then we were called granny killers and super spreaders for meeting in gatherings smaller than the mostly peaceful, somewhat fiery things. We were like, it's time to start warning the bride of Christ about the alternative religion that's masquerading as liberalism in America and mobilizing the bride of Christ to wake up. And I was like, I love you guys. This is awesome. Because we're at a very late hour of the American culture war, aren't we? You know, it's been said that weak times, that good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. And then good times create weak men, and the cycle continues, you see. We have become so accustomed to our American liberties and freedoms that we have forgotten the cost and price at which those freedoms and liberties come. It's Christopher Tytler, a Scottish judge and professor at the University of Edinburgh, a couple hundred years ago, famously describes what is now called the Tytler cycle. And he says, in summarizing human nature across human history, in one stroke, he brilliantly explains it. He says, we move from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependency, from dependency right back again to bondage. So we have been enjoying liberty as the fruit of biblical faith for so long, and that has created abundance. And then we forgot the ideas and the faith that brought us that liberty and abundance, and we slide right back down into selfishness, apathy, complacency, dependency, and we're sliding down that slope really, really quickly. But do you see, the culture war that we have been living in for so long has been brewing underneath the surface for decades. And many of us were not aware of it because the culture war hadn't reared its head to the extent that our lives were inconvenienced by said culture war, right? It wasn't, for many of us, be honest, church, for many of us, it wasn't until March of 2020 that we went, oh, crap. I'm actually having to change my comfortable cush Netflix and chill lifestyle. This is not fun. Tyranny is coming into my area where I live, and I don't really like that. And so we go, wow, Drag Queen Story Hour happened really fast. Well, why do men who really want to wear lingerie and panties and show some appendages, why do they want to read a book to my 6-year-old so badly? And we go, wow, that happened fast. Church, no, it did not happen fast. It happened very gradually for decades. But it brewed under the surface. It masqueraded as faux compassion, just the politics, and follow the science to keep the politically impotent pastors silent and slam their political opponents over the head as being science deniers, so that you weren't aware that the culture war was always a proxy war for a deeper spiritual war. There is no such thing as being not political, church. In America, if you were an American citizen, let me abuse you of this narrative. You are political in virtue of being an American. I'm apolitical. I'm Stephen Furtick. I'm neither left nor right. I just preach the life, death, resurrection of Jesus and Yeezys, and that's my gospel. And so I'm not really political either way. No, you can tuck that away with the tooth fairy. There's no such thing as being not political as an American. There's this thing called self-government. Maybe, have you heard of it before? It's called a constitutional republic. Yeah, we're responsible. When children are targeted, when children are abused, when babies are murdered, when the family is upended, when the bride of Christ is called non-essential, we are to blame for our apathy. I think it was William Wilberforce that said, a private faith that does not act in the face of oppression is no faith at all. Which is kind of just a way to summarize scripture. You'll know a tree by its fruit. Bad tree does not bear good fruit. A good tree does not bear bad fruit. Salt water and fresh water can't both flow out of the same spring. If your faith capitulates the moment that you're forced to get uncomfortable for your faith, then maybe you didn't have faith. I started with that introduction to make this conclusion. We are in this position in the American culture war right now because the high priests of the religion of humanism, the high pontiffs of the religion of secular progressivism, were far more zealous and dogmatic for their religion than the people of God were for theirs. That's why. They cared more about their demonic, secular, humanistic religion than we did for pure and undefiled religion. You know, in Isaiah 1, right, Brian? God tells his people, I don't want to listen to your songs anymore. I'm not listening to your prayer services anymore. I'm tired of them. Now, why? Did you know the backdrop of Isaiah 1 was that the Israelites were sacrificing their babies to Baal, the pagan god of baby sacrifice. And so he says, I'm actually shutting the heavens. You see, your festivals and your singing, they actually make me sick. Thankfully, God gives the solution. So stop doing evil and start doing good. Seek the cause of the orphan and the widow and the oppressed. You know, have you noticed how the orphan seems to always be really close to the heart of the Father? Why is that? Right? Pure and undefiled religion is this: care for orphans and widows in their distress. If I have to hear another pastor freaking quote me that verse while he does nothing about the genocide of baby image bearers in his city, I'm going to take the vaccine or something crazy. I'm going to do something crazy. I don't know. Well, the orphan's close to the heart of the Father because the orphan's life is endangered because his parents are dead, right? So who's his protector? So if we're supposed to care for the orphan whose life is endangered because his parents are dead, how much more should we care for the orphan in the womb whose life is endangered because his parents want him dead? I mean, we can't bring the orphan's parents back, but the orphan in the womb we can save from the wrath of their parents. Now I know that phrase just punched a hell of a ton of, I know that phrase was pregnant with meaning. I'm not saying that every family who killed their child was doing it in a wrathful way, but that's cold comfort to the murdered child. Why won't we do for good what the other side so zealously will do for evil? Why won't we use the political tools in a constitutional republic that others bled and died to give us, that the other side unapologetically wields for wickedness? And so, G.K. Chesterton, one of the most prophetic men that lives in the 20th century. By the way, church, if you're not reading Chesterton every day, are you even living? Like, you could be saved, I guess, but you're missing out, okay? Go read C.S. Lewis and Chesterton for 2 months, just go live in a hole and then come out, and it'll be like your third birth. First, your vagina, second, Christ, second birth, third, read C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, blow your mind. God gave you these men to wake you up, to be like Ezekiel, someone just talked about Ezekiel, blowing the trumpet and warning the people. So Chesterton once said, "Happy is he who knows not only the hidden causes of things, but who has not lost touch with their beginnings." And whenever I do that on a Sunday morning, people are like, uh-huh. It's okay, that's usually your response when you read Chesterton, amen. It's like, oh, I gotta read that 5 more times. Happy is he who knows not only the hidden causes of things, but who has not lost touch with their beginnings. What is Chesterton saying? What I told you 8 minutes ago, that things happen gradually, then suddenly. That bad ideas boil under the surface for decades, and then the nasty fruit starts growing, and then the church starts eating of the nasty fruit too, and then we get a tummy ache, and we go, how did we get here? Because the culture of death has been seeping into the church, because we haven't been like Ezekiel blowing the trumpet. We haven't been like the sons of Issachar who understood the times and knew what the people of God ought to do. There's scripture linking knowledge with action, who understood the times so they knew how God's people should live in that time and place that God put them. Chesterton is saying, happy is he who knows that ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. But we have been fulfilling my pastor Rob McCoy's prophetic and tragic warning when he says the church in America, we wait downstream to pick up the human heartache that we helped create through our apathy upstream. Why the stream analogy? Because Drag Queen Story Hour doesn't just happen. Those ideas get dumped into the watering hole somewhere, then they flow downstream, and then we're poisoned from the drink. Things happen gradually, then suddenly, just like bankruptcy. When you've been practicing a little bit financial malfeasance, right? Or when some of us or people we know have not been making wise financial decisions, you don't just wake up and go, oh, I'm bankrupt. There were a series of decisions that happened probably for a few years that led to... The same thing is true with politics, and the same thing is true culturally. Are you following me? So the true son and daughter of Issachar, the true son or daughter of the king, who understands that they are to steward what they've been given, will engage in politics. They'll engage in the culture wars to prevent human heartache that they can prevent by contending upstream. However, the theocracy of humanism has been taking the strategy book of Christians and using it better than we have. And one of the women who understood that happy is he who knows not only the hidden causes of things, but does not lose touch with their beginnings. One of the women who knew that you got to go upstream from whence these ideas come if you want to poison or enrich a culture. One of the most misunderstood women of the 20th century. one of the high priests of humanism, one of the architects of the sexual revolution and the culture of death, was named Margaret Sanger, the founder of the American Birth Control League, later renamed Planned Parenthood. It was funny during 2020 with BLM and Antifa and their mostly peaceful, somewhat fiery riots and the obsession over systemic racism. Planned Parenthood, because of pressure from the left, interestingly enough, finally wiped the name Margaret Sanger off of the New York City Margaret Sanger Planned Parenthood. And they had protected her legacy for decades from attacks from conservatives and pro-lifers. They said, no, she wasn't a racist. She wasn't a eugenicist. Yeah, she did speak at that one KKK meeting once, but she wasn't for that. And they defended her, whitewashed her legacy. And then they wiped her name off of the Planned Parenthood in New York City in 2020. It's very interesting. As my friends from Love Life will tell you, who saved children outside of that abortion center, it's still housed on a block entitled the Margaret Sanger Square. Never underestimate the impact of one man or woman radically committed to one agenda, to the abandonment of all else. The amount of righteousness or wickedness that one man or woman can accomplish when they're narrowly focused on that and nothing else cannot be understated in the American culture war, and Margaret Sanger is proof of this. So, who the heck was Margaret Sanger? And how did she lead us to this position in the culture war right now? You need to understand, Margaret Sanger was a Marxist, communist, socialist revolutionary. So she wasn't just the birth control gal. Yeah, she launched the American Birth Control League. But many people think of Sanger as like, well, her lane was birth control. No, she just really loved the poor and the minorities. So she wanted to use birth control to help them plan their parenthood so that they're better parents to the kids they already have that are outside of the womb. I just want to empower parents to be better parents. That's the legacy you've been told about Margaret Sanger for decades. So you need to understand, Sanger didn't begin her intellectual and philosophical premises with birth control. She wanted to accomplish the larger Marxist revolution. So she gets radicalized in the Socialist Party in the New York labor movement of the early 1900s in New York City. Between 1903 and 1910, she has these sort of alcohol-ridden, intellectual, stimulating high society gatherings where they talk about how they can upend society and revolutionize the world. And her premise was that if you were going to usher in the social revolution, the larger political revolution of Marxist utopian tyrants, you had to begin with the sexual revolution. That was actually the key that would unlock the revolution. Are you following me? Now, why would she believe this? She was cunning, like a serpent. She had a stronger control over ideas than most pastors, frankly. She understood that ideology is a hell of a drug. And if you can wield ideas effectively, you can change society. So she understood that in the early 1900s, America is largely functioning off of a Judeo-Christian worldview. Most people were or would have said they were Christians, and those who would say they weren't Christians were still functioning off of a morality that they were borrowing from the Christian worldview. Are you following me? The Judeo-Christian worldview was the dominant worldview that kept the social fabric intact. So she understood that the people won't be suckers for their utopian pipe dreams if they have virtue, honor, and morality. But if you can titillate the masses and get them to indulge every animalistic sexual appetite they have, say yes, if it feels good, do it. You're no different than an animal, Darwinism. And we can get them to indulge those base vices, then they won't be able to govern themselves. And they'll be very easy to control. Does anyone know any addicts? Just by show of hands, anyone know any addicts? It could be porn, sex, drugs, alcohol. Aren't they the most involved citizens in the process of self-government? I bet all the addicts, they could tell you all of the names of the politicians and all the local seats of political power within their county and city and state, and all the legislation and bills that are currently up and what we should do about it, right? They're really engaged, knowledgeable citizens. No! What's my point? When you debase and reduce people to their most animalistic appetites and desires, they can't govern themselves. That's where Sanger starts. The ideas that would found Planned Parenthood. Titillate the masses, which is why there's the obsession today with the pornographic sex ed in the schools. You can get the kids while they're young, they'll serve you forever. So, she starts publishing her ideas on the sexual liberation movement, the sexual revolution. She even defended the needs for political assassinations. These articles get her indicted on 3 counts for breaking the Comstock laws in New York City. So rather than getting arrested, you know what Margaret Sanger does? She ships off her kids to be raised by someone else, and she has her socialist friends in the New York labor movement forge her a passport, and she flees to England for 18 months to avoid being arrested. That's where the founder of Planned Parenthood gets her beginning. I know it will shock you, church, to learn that the founder of Planned Parenthood wasn't a great mom. I know that's like a man bites dog story, and you would have never guessed that. She spends 18 months in England, and she gets more radicalized by the revolutionaries she meets there than she was in New York. And she meets the Neo-Malthusians. Now, has anyone ever heard the term Malthusianism before? We got a woke sister over here, another woke sister, another awakened brother over here. Oh, we got, all right. Malthusianism refers to Malthus, Thomas Malthus, Malthusianism, okay? So she meets the Neo-Malthusians. Well, before we talk about who they were, who was Thomas Malthus? If these are his modern disciples, who was Thomas Malthus? He was the Anthony Fauci of the 18th century. He was just following the science. Trademark over the E. And if you disagree with me, it should be a hate crime. Remember Fauci suggested that? You don't remember that one? I am the science. Well, that's what Thomas Malthus believed about himself. He was just following the science, right? And Thomas Malthus is our first overpopulationist. Have you guys ever noticed Bill Gates, Melinda Gates, Klaus Schwab, George Soros, Bernie Sanders, AOC? How about the entire liberal establishment's obsession with the fact that we have too many people on planet Earth? And if we don't do something about that, the world will burn, right? And you'll all die. So give us all of your political rights, just temporarily, because we need that power to fight the sun god, because climate change, and he's angry at us. So I'm sorry, Mother Gaia. And then we'll solve the climate catastrophe, and they'll never give you those political rights back. Isn't the overpopulation, isn't it so politically convenient? If you don't give us all of your rights, the world will burn and you won't have grandkids. Okay, just solve it. And they've been peddling this stuff since the late 1700s. So I just needed to tell you, Thomas Malthus, that's where we get the overpopulation. So he said food production can't keep up with population growth, with the inevitable result being what? Massive starvation. There won't be enough food or resources. So Neo-Malthusianism naturally leads into eugenics. Because if there's too many people and the world will burn if we don't solve that, then you got to decide who gets to live and who gets to die, and who gets to have kids, and who should be sterilized by the state and not allowed to have kids. And you'll notice when you study this stuff, the eugenicists were always pieces of crap. They were just like really bad people. Isn't that shocking? So here's Thomas Malthus, if you wanted to know why this is significant. Okay, so Hosea 4:6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So if you're feeling like I'm fire hosing you right now, good! Because how can you defeat an enemy that you don't understand? So I'm explaining how these ideas were upstream, and now they're in the watering hole, and now they're yielding bad fruit in the soil, and I'm telling you not to eat it, and to weed it out before it's too late. That's why I'm going all history crazy on you right now. So here's Thomas Malthus. You ready for this demon? All children born beyond what would be required to keep up the population to a desired level must necessarily perish, unless room be made for them by the deaths of grown persons. So we should facilitate, instead of foolishly and vainly endeavoring to impede the operations of nature in producing this mortality. It's probably COVID. And if we dread the too frequent visitation of the horrid form of famine, We should encourage the other forms of destruction which we compel nature to use. Instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. In our towns, we should make the streets more narrow. We should crowd more people into the houses because we want to court the return of the plague. In the country, we should build our villages near stagnant pools and encourage settlements in these really marshy and unwholesome situations. But above all, we should reprobate specific remedies for ravaging diseases. It means stop the remedies. And we have to stop or restrain benevolent but much mistaken men who thought they were doing a service to mankind by projecting schemes for the total extirpation of particular disorders. Okay, can I summarize that for you? Some people are good and some people are bad. And we need more of the good people and less of the bad people. And the poor, and the mentally and physically disabled, oh gosh, Nick Vujicic doesn't have any arms. We shouldn't let him have kids. Oh, you have Down syndrome? Ew. That's neo-Malthusianism. That's eugenics. Eugenics actually, the root means good in birth. Did you know that? Good in birth, which means what? Some people are not good in birth. So there are good genes and bad genes. That's Thomas Malthus, the first overpopulationist. Okay? Jeez Louise. So that's the neo-Malthusians that Margaret Sanger meets in her 18-month exile in England. By the way, you can go Reuters, fact check me, 5 Pinocchios on all this crap, okay? You can read a book called Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood by Dr. George Grant, a personal friend, who I think in 50 years, 60 years, our grandchildren will view the way we view G.K. Chesterton today. How's that for an endorsement? Go read that book. Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood. Things like the citations are like, well, could be a book in itself. So the next step from Malthusianism is eugenics. So then, fast forward to 1964, you get a dude named Paul Ehrlich. Anyone heard that name before, Paul Ehrlich? He wrote a book called The Population Bomb. The Population Bomb. And basically, he's parroting Malthus's ideas from the late 1700s and early 1800s. And the population bomb was responsible for international policy adjustments. I'm telling you, like, millions of people are dead because Paul Ehrlich wrote the book with the population bomb. He said, if we don't significantly curb overpopulation in the next few years, right, it always starts with that, we're gonna have massive starvation all over the world. So, you had Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, start linking access to food, water, and health care to sterilization status. It was the vaccine passport of its day. Oh, you want to participate in the economy? Oh, you need water, food? Well, are your tubes tied? Did you snip, Dad? That started happening in India. You want to know the biggest example? China's one-child policy that resulted in millions of murdered babies and millions of forcibly sterilized women. Paul Ehrlich sat on the board of Planned Parenthood. Ah, shocker. Man bites dog story again. Have you noticed how the overpopulationists and the abortion industry were always on the same team? Isn't that interesting? So Paul Ehrlich starts saying, Malthus is right. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Some people are good and some people are bad. There's too many people, too many people, too many people. So Paul Ehrlich literally proposed that the government should put a fertility control agent in the waters of poor urban neighborhoods to sterilize the moms without their knowledge. But the government will own the antidote if we ever choose to let them have kids in the future. So if you think Thomas Malthus's ideas didn't flow downstream and cause massive heartache, let me abuse you of that narrative. Paul Ehrlich. Okay. Wow. So that's who she meets, the neo-Malthusians. Then she meets a man named Havelock Ellis. Anyone ever heard of Alfred Kinsey? Good, yeah. Pornographic demon. There's a Kinsey Institute at Indiana University named after Alfred Kinsey. Last fall, they erected a new statue to Alfred Kinsey. It's at Indiana University's campus. I believe the Republicans in Indiana right now are actually trying to defund the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University, so you can pray for that. Alfred Kinsey died because he well, yeah, he pleasured himself too long and too many times, so he died from that, actually. A lot of people don't know that. Isn't that interesting? So that's the PG-13 version. I'm not joking, by the way. Welcome to the sexual revolution, huh? So Havelock Ellis was England's Alfred Kinsey. That's why I brought up Kinsey. Havelock Ellis was England's Alfred Kinsey. He wrote over 50 books on every lewd form of sexual experimentation. He himself was impotent, so he was always trying to find new ways to get excited. Guess who starts an affair with Margaret Sanger? Havelock Ellis, okay? So Havelock Ellis was a rabid eugenicist, and Havelock Ellis had a mentor. His mentor's name was Francis Galton. Now, Francis Galton was the modern father of the eugenics movement. He actually coined the term. The term eugenics didn't exist before Francis Galton. Okay, so you're starting to see it? You got the sexual pornographer crazy dudes being mentored by the father of the modern eugenics movement. Francis Galton's half-cousin was Charles freaking Darwin. Yeah, you're probably just going, yeah, that makes sense, Seth, man. Survival of the fittest. Fit and unfit. So might makes right in the religion of humanism. And if it is survival of the fittest, and Darwin's right, and we're like an animal kingdom, then you're no more valuable than the dog, the cat, or the cow. There's no sanctity of human life. There's no human dignity. There's no human exceptionalism. There's no image of God. What a joke. If that's true, then the strong will survive, and the weak will die, just like the jungle, even if the strong have to kill and weed out the weak. Darwinism, neo-Malthusianism, eugenics, it's all the same religion. And it was a proxy war attack against the Creator and those created in the image of God. So, that's Sanger's influences and mentors. And Havelock Ellis and Margaret Sanger would write letters to one another for decades following her return to New York and her founding of the American Birth Control League. And we have some of those letters today. No one was a greater political and sexual influence upon the life of Margaret Sanger than Havelock Ellis, whose mentors can be traced right back to Charles Darwin. Okay, I need to speed up now. She comes to America, she opens the American Birth Control Review. It's a journal, it's a publication. She starts publishing her ideas, and she invites her eugenicist demon friends from around the world to write articles in her review. Then she opens up the American Birth Control League in 1921, a few years after the Birth Control Review, later renamed, of course, Planned Parenthood. Here's Margaret Sanger. Eugenics without birth control seems to us a house built upon the sands. It is at the mercy of the rising streams of the unfit. So what did she just tell you? That she wasn't just about birth control. It was a tool to be wielded to accomplish the aims of eugenics. Eugenics without birth control seems to us a house built upon the sands. We're trying to build this house of eugenics to murder the Jews, Slavs, Italians, and the mentally and physically disabled, but the house keeps crumbling because we're building it on the sands. What stupid idiots. Let's build it on the rock-solid foundation of birth control. That's what she means, church. Did you know Margaret Sanger once said, there you go, quote, fact check me, ready? Birth control appeals to the advanced radical because it is calculated to undermine the authority of the Christian churches. What the hell does that mean? That the whole point was a proxy war attack against Christianity. That's what that means. Dang it, Genesis, be fruitful and multiply. The Christians are obeying their Creator. They're multiplying, they're subduing the earth, they're exercising dominion. So birth control appeals to me, the Marxist revolutionary Sanger, because it's calculated to undermine the authority of the be fruitful and multiply Christians. The culture war was a proxy war for the spiritual war. Let me give you one more. She said, we don't have slides for these, I just have to pull them out of my head. She said that through sex, mankind may attain that great spiritual illumination which will transform the world and light up the only path to an earthly paradise, end quote. That sounds very religious. Through sex, mankind may attain that great spiritual illumination which will transform the world and light up the only path to an earthly paradise. It sounds like an alternative Great Commission. It sounds like the Great Commission of the religion of humanism. Therefore, go and make disciples of Charles Darwin. Therefore, go and make disciples of that serpent and snake and indulge every freaking desire you have to light up the only path to an earthly paradise. Ever heard the name Aleister Crowley? Yeah, remember the white supremacist, racist, and rapist who raped children? Do you know the story of Aleister Crowley? Okay. He was a Satanist. And he summed up the creed of Satanism in the same way that Christ summed up the law and the prophets by saying, love God and love neighbor. He sums up the creed of Satanism by saying, do what thou wilt. There is no other law beyond this. One of the most popular Satanists in world history says, all the law and the prophets of Satan can be summed up as do as thou wilt. Through sex, mankind may attain that great spiritual illumination, so indulge everything, do whatever the hell you want. It was an alternative gospel. What did I say earlier? The high priests of humanism were more zealous and dogmatic for their religion than the people of God were for theirs. And if you don't think that had consequences, let me introduce you to the last 3 years. Okay, I'm getting really carried away here. They told me 40 minutes. So she launches the American Birth Control League. And she writes her book, The Pivot of Civilization, in 1922. I think you can find it used. It's hard to get. It's kind of expensive. The Pivot of Civilization in 1922. Margaret Sanger, her first book. You want to know some of the things she said in the book? Are you guys awake? Is everyone good? Okay, good. Here you go. She longed for when the choking human undergrowth of morons and imbeciles would be segregated and sterilized. End quote. Here's another one. I want to create a race of thoroughbreds by encouraging more children from the fit and less from the unfit. What were the key languages of eugenicists? Fit and unfit. If you forget everything else this evening, remember the words fit and unfit. That is the language of eugenicists. She started speaking and holding conferences, and she got massive support from social leaders and the government and massive billionaires like the Carnegies, the Fords, and the Rockefellers, the billionaire financiers of the eugenics movement in America and of the American Eugenics Society. By the way, I forgot to tell you, when American Birth Control League gets founded in 1921, it was originally housed in the same office spaces as the American Eugenics Society. So Sanger's walking into work, sipping lattes, or whatever it was then, chatting it up with the founders and presidents of the American Eugenics Society. They shared the same office spaces. And all of the funding to launch the American Birth Control League came from board members or donors of the American Eugenics Society. Church, it's because it was the same movement. But sex was that key. Birth control was that key that might unlock the revolution. Here's how she put it. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the overfertility of the mentally and physically defective. Have you ever heard the left talk about how, like, we hate ableism? Have you ever heard that? Like, conservatives are ableist because they don't want Bernie Sanders' universal health care, so they're damning people who need health care, so they're ableist. Yeah, that language would be the language of ableism, the mentally and physically defective. And then she goes after 501c3 charities. I won't get into all that because the 501c3 charities are Christians. They're trying to love and care for the oppressed and the poor and the minorities, and those are the very classes we kind of want to sterilize and eliminate. So she would actually attack Christian charities for loving the class of victims that she had a political interest in eliminating. Isn't that interesting? And then she launches the Negro Project in 1939, the Negro Project. And here was the proposal. Here's the problem, according to Margaret Sanger, the non-racist feminist slay queen crushing through glass ceilings. Here's the problem, according to her. the mass of Negroes. Now listen, guys, I'm quoting her, okay? Don't come lynch me afterwards, okay? I'm quoting Margaret Sanger. Sometimes I had some people come up to me like, you shouldn't be calling us Negroes. I'm like, I'm not, she is. The mass of Negroes, particularly in the South, still breed carelessly and disastrously, with the result that the increase among Negroes, even more than among whites, is from that portion of the population least intelligent and fit. Oh, there's that word again, huh? Fit. So here's the solution. Ready? If that's the problem, what was the solution of the Negro Project? The gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks. Those human weeds, which prevent the blossoming of the finest flowers of American civilization. Oh, gosh. Defective stocks, human weeds. She's talking about human beings. But flowers, those are rich white people and people with good genes. So she hires black charismatic social leaders to propagandize birth control in majority black enclaves in New York City to deflect criticism of her being a racist by putting black faces at the front of her eugenics campaign so that she could say, well, look, hey. And today, Planned Parenthood has deflected racist criticisms for decades by saying, look at our board of directors, half of them are black. Look at Alexis McGill Johnson, the current president, she's black. What are you talking about, we're racist? To which we say, no, that was always the point. You're using black people as tools to accomplish your more sinister goals. Now, lest you think I'm jesting and just trying to rile up conservatives into a frenzy, how about we let the directors of the Negro Project speak for themselves? Is that okay? Should we let them speak for themselves? Okay. She started hiring Negro Project directors, and they wrote down their ideas for us. Isn't that sweet? Thank you, guys. The internet is forever. Here you go. Here's a Negro Project director. You ready? There is a great danger that we will fail because the Negroes think that this is a plan for their extermination. So, hence, let's appear to let the colored run it. One other Negro Project director who was on the payroll of the American Birth Control League. I wonder if Southern darkies can, okay, pause. Who calls black Southern darkies racist? I wonder if Southern darkies can ever be entrusted with a clinic because our experience causes us to doubt their ability to work, except under white supervision. Oh yeah, but conservatives are racist for supporting pro-life legislation because it disproportionately hurts black women, well, not their black babies. Okay, the entire operation was a ruse. Do you see that? It was a manipulative attempt to get blacks to cooperate in their own elimination. And to quote my friend Dr. George Grant, one of the worldwide experts on the life of Margaret Sanger, that project was largely successful. Its genocidal intentions were carefully camouflaged beneath several layers of condescending social service rhetoric and organizational expertise. In other words, follow the science. She had a board member that was part of the KKK. His name was Lothrop Stoddard, and he wrote a book called The Menace of the Underman, and the Germans translated the German term Untermensch, or subhuman, from the English version of Margaret Sanger's board member's book. He had another guy named Madison Grant who was an advisor. Madison Grant led the American Eugenics Society. Madison Grant put a black man in a cage with a monkey at the New York City Bronx Zoo to, quote, illustrate evolution. That black man, Oda Benga, took his life 10 years later. Madison Grant wrote a book called The Passing of the Great Race, which he said that it's the stupid Christians with their belief in the sanctity of human life. It's that belief that's preventing us from eliminating defective infants and sterilizing adults who are themselves of no value to the community. And so then Adolf Hitler, after his failed coup attempt in Munich, is in jail, and he's reading the book called The Passing of the Great Race by Madison Grant, the guy who put the black man in the cage with the monkey, and he's writing fan mail to Madison Grant, calling that book his Bible. Okay, that was the fastest I've ever done that one. Madison Grant was one of the leaders of the American Eugenics Society. Sanger had a mentor and advisor named Ernst Rudin, and Ernst Rudin wrote a piece in her review called Eugenic Sterilization and Urgent Need. At the time he wrote that piece and was advising Margaret Sanger, he was none other than the director of Hitler's genetic sterilization and had taken an early role in crafting the Nazi Society for Racial Hygiene. So when you hear people like Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk and Michael Knowles and Ben Shapiro say, hey, the abortion thing, it's kind of a Nazi-esque kind of thing. Those aren't Republican talking points. I'm giving you the history behind why people say, yeah, abortion is kind of a Nazi-esque kind of thing. And then Hitler would thank American eugenicists and actually would write letters with some of the leaders of the American Eugenics Society, and he would actually give credit. We have a Hitler slide, I don't have the time for it, where he'd actually credit studying the laws in several American states on eugenics as helping provide the inspiration for the very eugenic laws that would be on the books in Nazi Germany. So, okay, all right. So Sanger would say fit and unfit, right? Well, the Nazis had a spin on that concept. Lebensunwertensleben. It means life unworthy of life. So it's life. We'll acknowledge that, but it's unworthy of life. It's unfit. We call babies unwanted. The Nazis said undesirables, and they called the Jews useless eaters. Much the same language used to describe the preborn today that you see will hurt my finances and my salary. I can't afford another child. So the baby's a useless eater. They're unwanted, unfit, undesirable. Eugenics had a major sway in America as well. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes of the Supreme Court upheld Virginia's 1924 mandated sterilization law in a 1927 court opinion called Buck versus Bell, an 8-1 decision that upheld Virginia's mandated sterilization law. And Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, a political progressive and eugenicist, summed up what he called the science in that SCOTUS opinion by saying, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Within 10 years of Buck versus Bell, you had laws mandating the sterilization of those considered a threat to the gene pool. Alcoholics, criminals, immigrants, and African Americans, passed in 32 different states. It's estimated that at least 70,000 people were forcibly sterilized between California and New York. Lest you think I'm jesting, Henry Osborn, the co-founder of the American Eugenics Society, and a paleontologist, actually. So he really loved the animals, he just hated humans. Have you noticed that interesting aspect of progressivism today? Where in Colorado, the gray wolf has more protection than babies, where if you disturb the egg of a bald eagle, you could be fined tens of thousands of dollars and sentenced up to 5 years in federal prison, but kill a baby through point of birth in New York City, and you're celebrated as a feminist slay queen, exercising your reproductive health care rights. What I'm telling you is that loving animals more than humans is not a new aspect of modernity, it's actually quite old. So Henry Osborn summed up the science like this: as science has enlightened the government in the prevention and spread of disease, it must also enlighten government in the prevention of the spread and multiplication of worthless members of society. Sounds like Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins. Well, the only brother, intellectual, Ezekiel Watchman, son of Issachar, to see all of these ideas early on as the pontiffs of progressivism were dumping the ideas into the watering hole, as they were casting their humanistic, orgasmic seeds into the soil of the American Republic. There was one man who saw what was happening before the ideas started being birthed and was warning the world. That man's name was G.K. Chesterton. I call him the first lib-triggering troll. The first lib-triggering troll. Before Reagan, before Trump, the dude knew how to troll the left. He described what he saw like this. He said, if Darwinism was the doctrine of the survival of the fittest, then eugenics was the doctrine of the survival of the nastiest. Brilliant. Right? After everything I just told you about the eugenicists, aren't you thinking, what nasty people? Because who's left alive behind the project of eugenics? Some of the nastiest human beings you could possibly imagine. So he described the abortophilic eugenicists of his day the way we should describe the theocratic abortophilic eugenicists of our day when he said they combine a hardening of the heart with a sympathetic softening of the head. Yes, they're stupid. Yes, their ideas make them stupider. But church, don't mistake stupidity for lack of zeal. Don't mistake dumb ideas for a lack of passion to implement those ideas into the public square. They were more zealous for their religion than we were for ours. And so with almost unparalleled political vision, church, with seemingly lofty heights of prescience, Chesterton, soaring at 80,000 philosophical feet, would write an article in an English newspaper in 1920, 1 year before Sanger opens the American Birth Control League. So 1 year before the organization that would bear the name Planned Parenthood is founded, Chesterton is saying, I know where all of this will end. And he said, we are not so very far off from even the sacrifice of babies, if not to a crocodile, at least to a creed. The creed of eugenics, the creed of neo-Malthusianism, the creed of overpopulationism, the creed of humanism. And yet, did you know Planned Parenthood would not begin defending abortions until the 60s? Did you know Margaret Sanger did not support abortions? Some people don't know that. They wrote a health booklet in 1964, and they said, abortion kills the life of a baby after it has already begun, and it is dangerous to your life and health, end quote. So Planned Parenthood opposed abortions in 1964, 9 years before Roe v. Wade. So while that organization was not planning on killing unborn children when it was founded, Chesterton looked at the ideas and said, the conclusion of your ideas is child sacrifice. What an unbelievable level of prescience. How prophetic. To understand where the humanists' ideas would take them better than the humanists espousing those ideas would understand it. Wow. Ideology is a hell of a drug, huh, church? Ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. So let me try to land this plane. I'm so sorry. A young woman with the spirit of Chesterton, with the lion of the tribe of Judah roaring inside of her, a daughter of Issachar. In 1941, walks the streets of Munich, Germany, facing the same ideology that we are today. Because there's no limiting principle to eugenics, is there, church? If you can describe one class of human beings as unfit, why not another? If you can create these categories for personhood to be used to deny personhood to the Jew, why not a new category for personhood to be used to deny personhood to the black? And then why not a new category of personhood to be used to deny personhood to the preborn? There's no limiting principle to those who could be targeted for elimination in the religion of humanism. That's why Francis Schaeffer said, humanism is the placing of man at the center of all things and making him the measure of all things. Schaeffer was just paraphrasing the serpent. Ye shall be as gods. So facing that same religion, a young woman named Sophie Scholl walks the sidewalks of Munich, Germany, and she sees a paper on the ground, and she picks it up, and it says, Leaflets of the White Rose. She starts to read it, and her heart is spurred to action. I want to briefly tell you her story because I want your heart to be spurred to action. I don't want you to have a private faith that fails to act in the face of oppression. I want you to give God a reason to show Charlotte, North Carolina, and America mercy. I want you to give God a reason to open up the heavens again and hear our prayers. She reads it. It says, We are the White Rose Resistance. We are your bad conscience, and we will not leave you alone. It says, if you know, why do you not act? She reads it and she goes, my brother Hans talks like this a lot at dinner time. Well, come to find out, the White Rose Resistance had not only been co-founded, but it was being run by none other than her older brother Hans, the 24-year-old young man who was just trying to protect his little sister. Because in 1942, the Jews had been wearing the yellow star for about 3.5 years. Their ashes are already falling on the steeples of local churches whose pastors won't preach the full counsel of God, so Dietrich Bonhoeffer calls them syncretistic, cheap grace Christians. He knew how dangerous political resistance was in 1942. Well, Sophie says, I don't care. And she becomes the youngest and the only female of the White Rose Resistance in 1942 in Munich, Germany. For the rest of 1942, these 20-somethings stay up all night, writing, printing, and distributing anti-Nazi leaflets all around Germany. They actually took trains in the middle of the night to major German cities and dropped off piles of their illegal leaflets to prick the conscience of the culture and awaken the church to action and plead with people to do something. And then on February 18th, 1943, they took things to the next level. This was 80 years ago last month. And Hans and Sophie alone walk onto the campus at the University of Munich, which you can visit today. And during class time, when the halls were quiet, they started distributing piles of their illegal leaflets all around the university. And then in this iconic act, Sophie walks to the third floor balcony at the University of Munich, and she throws a pile of hundreds of leaflets down to the atrium below. The janitor, a committed Nazi, caught Sophie in the act, called the Gestapo on the spot, and Hans and Sophie were arrested on February 18th, 1943, and we actually have their mug shots for you this evening that were taken the day that they were arrested. They spend the next 4 days in prison being brutally abused and interrogated, and they refuse to implicate any of their other friends or members of the White Rose Resistance. Unfortunately, they found incriminating evidence at Sophie's apartment that led to their friend Christoph Probst being arrested, whose wife was in the hospital recovering from childbirth, whose child he would never meet. And in these 4 days, it was as if the father would enter their cell room, pick them up into his hands, and Sophie would speak with a level of moral clarity and courage and conviction that was lost on most German pulpits. Because they were arrested on February 18th, 1943, they failed to show up to a meeting they had scheduled that afternoon. They didn't make that meeting. That meeting was with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the founder of the Confessing Church in Germany, who mobilized pastors to stand against Hitler and was assassinated for his failed assassination attempt and involvement in the Valkyrie plot to take the life of Hitler, who had come to meet with Hans and Sophie. They never made that meeting. Sophie said a couple things in her final days that still keep me up at night in 2023. I believe, like Chesterton and like C.S. Lewis, God raised up Sophie and Hans and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others, and Martin Niemöller later, and Oskar Schindler, to be the voice in the wilderness. Okay. Sophie is unique because she didn't blame the doers of evil. She didn't scream at Tucker Carlson and say, why are they reading porn books to kids? She didn't complain about the doers of evil. She understood that was the norm. Wake up, church. Evil people do evil things. Stop being surprised by it. How are they doing this? Because they're wicked. Why won't they do this? Because they're following their father, and when he lies, he speaks his native language. Why are they doing this? Because they're following Satan, who masquerades as an angel of light, so it shouldn't surprise you when his followers do as well. That's why. So here's a 21-year-old to wake and put a fire under your butt today. How did she see the problem? Does it feel like we have a lot of problems right now? Holy moly. Well, let a 21-year-old diagnose our problems. The real damage It's caused by all of those millions out there who just want to survive. You know, the honest men and women that just want to be left in peace, right? Those who don't want their little lives disturbed by anything bigger than themselves. Those with no sides and no causes. Those who won't take measure of their own strength. Yeah, we have strength. For fear of antagonizing our own weaknesses. Those who don't like to make waves or enemies. Those for whom freedom, honor, truth, and principle are just literature. In other words, it's just words. Those who live small die small. It's the reductionistic approach to life. Because church, if you keep it small, you'll keep it under control. If you don't make any noise, the boogeyman won't find you. FBI, Department of Homeland Security. Merrick Garland. But it's all an illusion. It's all an illusion. Because they die too. Those people who roll up their spirits into tiny little balls so as to be safe. Safe from what? Life is always on the edge of death. Narrow streets lead to the same place as wide avenues. And a little candle burns itself out just like the flaming torch does. I choose my own way to burn. All right, we need to ask a question now. Who talks like that at 21? That sounds like Chesterton or Churchill. That sounds like William Wilberforce or C.S. Lewis. What in the world? Who has that level of clarity and conviction at 21? A young woman with the Lion of the tribe of Judah roaring inside of her to say, get off the bench, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, get onto the battlefield for your king, and watch what miracles all work through obedience. Because obedience is better than sacrifice. All right, so the Nazis come to get her on February 22nd, 1943, to take her to the guillotine. But her bravery so disturbed her own prison guards that the prison guards relaxed the rules and let Hans and Sophie meet with their parents in a side room right before being taken to the chopping block. And Sophie's mother looked at Sophie in the eye and she said, remember Jesus, Sophie. And Sophie responded to her mother, yeah, but you too, Mama. Sophie's cellmate would write letters to Sophie's parents after they were killed and say that those final days in that cell, your daughter was not so concerned with her impending death. She was disturbed in soul as to how her parents could handle losing two children on the same day. The freaking executioner was later interviewed. And he said, we had never seen someone meet his end as she did. None of us understood how that was possible. And as she left her cell room for the final time, she looked out of her barred window and simply said, how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day. And I have to go now. But what does my death matter? If through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action. And her final words before the blade fell was, the sun still shines. And Hans's final words were simply, freedom, freedom. That reminds me of Bonhoeffer's final words when he was hung naked at Flossenburg prison on April 9th, 1945. This is the end. For me, the beginning of life. So church, while rose blossoms may perish in the fall, they reappear in the spring, amen? And while all of the members, nearly, of the White Rose Resistance were found and executed, their sacrifice has planted the seeds of resistance in the hearts of millions whose actions will keep alive the legacy of the white rose. And your sacrifice, church, will water those seeds of resistance. So one day, thousands will be awakened and stirred to action. The white rose will blossom again, and we can say, the sun still shines. I am rebuilding the white rose resistance for this generation against our silent but far more deadly holocaust of abortion, to accomplish and build the army of Christian resistance against the culture of death that Hans and Sophie dreamed of but never saw realized, to end our holocaust of abortion today before it's too late, because you're living through the next iteration of that religion of eugenics, neo-Malthusianism, Darwinism, and humanism that says some people are unfit to live, and we as the high priest of humanism get to decide who gets to live and who gets to die. That's why White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who replaced Circleback Psaki, is calling you the greatest and most extreme threat to freedom and democracy and domestic terrorists, because you're like Gideon in Judges 6, walking out of the cave the church has been hiding in to start tearing down the high places of child sacrifice, to give God a reason to show America mercy so he'll hear our prayers and heal our land, because the land has been desecrated with blood. My pastor, Rob McCoy, calls me the Charlie Kirk of the pro-life movement. I'm not bragging you. I'm telling you that I've been raised up. I've been sassy since conception, and you haven't seen me sassy yet. I'm a pain in the ass, a stick in the eye, and a fly in the ointment to the abortion industrial complex, the culture of death, the spirit of the age, and his obsession with wiping out the image of God in the womb. We're trying to build the Turning Point USA of the pro-life movement, to punch back 5 times as hard against the culture of death for the sake of little babies in the womb, and frankly, the witness of the blood-bought bride of Christ in a culture of death. So if you want to join the White Rose Resistance, anyone excited? You want to join the White Rose Resistance? Scan the QR code and become a foot soldier or an ally and join us at the White Rose. Come give me a hug. We have white roses. We have merch for sale. In the meantime, I'll see you on the battlefield. Go out there and give them heaven.
Come on. Come on, you can do better than that. Come on. Incredible. Incredible. Well, hey, don't go too far, because we got a Q&A. We have a QR code and an additional QR code on the screen. What you can do is you can scan this, and you can you grab the water table too? Thanks, buddy. You can scan this and you can ask a question. What we want to do is fill up this chat with some questions, some great questions that we can ask Seth, get some next steps, honestly, and figure out how we can really do a great job. Thank you so much. This is for you. You might need that. So feel free, go ahead, scan this. You pull out your camera app, it'll pull up the link. While we're doing that, wow.
And why don't we just give Freedom House and David and Jordan and Troy and Penny and the worship team and the media team a big round of applause. I don't have to tell you, there's not very many churches in North Carolina or America that would let me just do what I did without pulling me off the stage halfway through and throwing me out into utter darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So thank you, Freedom House, and thank you, David.
Thank you for being here and for blessing us with that. I think there's something special about someone who is willing to be so vulnerable and be so honest with the situation that's at hand. Because it's not just about a woman's right to choose. It's not just about a law that says, hey, you can do this or you can't do this with your body, right? We know that, and or at least we think we know that, like it's head knowledge. But to watch someone articulate so clearly what actually is at stake is, I think, necessary for us to actually make a difference.
Amen.
If it stays head knowledge and we don't actually grapple with the reality that is reality, then we don't actually take a next step and we don't actually make a change.
Amen. And while people are sending in questions, because I know we want to give people just a minute, I'll just respond to what David just said. David and Jordan and I were talking about this at lunch today, actually. This idea that just as physical atrophy occurs through not using your muscles, so does moral atrophy occur through not using your voice and acting. And one of David's favorite books that he told me this afternoon is the book, The Screw Tape Letters, by C.S. Lewis, where C.S. Lewis explains through this demon, Screwtape, who's mentoring his junior demon, Wormwood, his nephew demon, on how to oppress the church, how to cause chaos, how to pull people down into hell and ensure they don't repent and spend eternity in heaven. And one of the most powerful lines is in direct relation to what David just said about if it's just head knowledge, if you just know all this stuff, but you never act, what does that do to the soul? So C.S. Lewis, through Screwtape, tells Wormwood, as the humans have said, active habits are strengthened by repetition, but passive ones are weakened. The longer he, the Christian, feels without acting, the less he will be able ever to act. And in the long run, the less he will be able to feel at all. In other words, if I can paraphrase that, church, Satan's most prideful goal is to get Christians to stay in the position of knowing all of the right things and maybe even feeling broken about the evil they see in the world. It's okay. Just let them feel broken. Let them feel all the right things, but just never do anything about it. Because if they stay there long enough, they won't act at all. And then here's the real kicker. If we can get them in the position of feeling and not acting for a really, 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 really long time, then eventually they won't even feel anything anymore. And you'll become a spiritual degenerate of a little couch potato who's only good for orthodoxy and not orthopraxy, and your faith will be proved dead because it didn't have works. Those are works that God prepared in advance that you might walk in them. Wake up, get off the bench, exercise your moral muscle and stewardship as a son or daughter of the King because you've been told to, and also for the sake of your own soul, so you won't become dead inside. Anyways.
So for people that don't know, tell us in brief blurb, how did you get involved in the fight for life?
Yeah. So I've been a pro-life activist since I was a fetus. My mother was the director of a pregnancy resource center in the late 1980s and early 1990s. She was 9 months pregnant with me while the executive director of a pregnancy resource center, and stepped down when she gave birth to me, the firstborn, 2 younger sisters, homeschooled through 8th grade, went to Whittier High School, Nixon's alma mater, did my senior project on abortion. Whittier High School told me, you can't pick the topic of abortion. I said, here's a copy of the Constitution you're making me read in government class. I will be doing my senior project on the issue of abortion, or you're gonna have a lawsuit on your hands. I threatened a lawsuit to Whittier High School. They backed off real quick and let me pick the topic. Just a quick little vignette and encouragement, by the way, that sometimes when you stare Fauci and Fausti and dwarf-like little would-be tyrants in the face and you say, sit down, they often do, because it's just the projection of strength to cover up an inner weakness. They're overcompensating for their moral failures and weaknesses, like Fauci and others. And so Whittier High School was like, oh, we weren't ready for that. Hashtag homeschooled. I had to memorize some of those founding documents when I was homeschooled, so I knew my rights. And then I went to Westmont College, a Christian college in Santa Barbara you should never send your children to. They create high priests for humanism more than ambassadors for Christ, and they have pro-abortion professors on staff that they refuse to fire. I start the pro-life club there. I graduate. I start doing pro-life speaking. I meet Pastor Jack Hibbs and Pastor Rob McCoy in October of 2020, and then Charlie Kirk, and the rest is history.
I want to see you talk that fast and still be clear and articulate. I'll be like, speaking in tongues up in here. Someone start running around the room. So there's a couple questions like this. What are your thoughts on incremental abolition of abortion, like a heartbeat bill? I think another question says, how do we answer the rape incest question as a reason for abortion? Could it be an option to move legislation down the line?
What was the second one?
So how do we answer the rape/incest as a reason for abortion? Could it be both of these questions have to do with legislation.
Yeah. Good. So there's a debate in the pro-life movement. I'll do this very quickly because it gets in the weeds real quick. Between incrementalism and immediatism. They call themselves abolitionists. I don't let them call themselves that because William Wilberforce was an abolitionist. And we all call him an abolitionist, and yet he supported incremental legislation. William Wilberforce in the British colonies supported legislation to refit slave ships, to literally rebuild them, to reduce suffering for the African men and women who were being brought to the British colonies. That's incremental legislation. And immediatists today ought to say that William Wilberforce is a big, meanie bigot who's trying to prolong slavery, and yet none of us believe that about him, even though that's an incremental example of legislation. It wasn't a total ban, and yet before his death, William Wilberforce would accomplish both the abolition of slavery and the slave trade without firing a single bullet. I would have preferred that route over the Civil War and all the hundreds of thousands of young men that were murdered, frankly. I wish we could have done the William Wilberforce way. So incrementalism is to say it's better to have some protections for the preborn than none at all. And if you don't have the political capital or the votes you need to get through an abortion ban, it's better to put that rape exception in the bill, even though it kills you to do it, than to, because you don't, the squishes won't give you their vote on that bill unless you put in the rape exception. It's better to do that and save some children than no children at all. And then the immediatists would say, and this is what I've been told by the immediatists for the last few years, they said, oh yeah, Seth Gruber, he wants to keep abortion legal so he can keep the speaking honorariums flowing. Yeah, he wants to keep abortion legal because he's got a good career, to which I, in my anger, sometimes sin. I was very successful in sales, and I left that position to try to end abortion. So, screw you. So immediatism would say that Christians are actually sacrificing their faith, and some of them will actually say it's actually a form of apostasy. I've had some immediatists say it's actually a form of apostasy to support incremental legislation. Well, guess what? The immediatists who have always wanted to ban abortion at the state levels can now do so because of the incremental efforts of pro-lifers who overturned Roe versus Wade. Yeah. And I haven't heard a thank you yet. So that's what that debate is about. In terms of the rape and incest stuff, you don't get to kill Timmy because of the crimes of his father. That's the answer to that. It's very anti-biblical to punish children for the crimes of their father. It does say that one's sins will be visited to multiple generations, but that doesn't mean God will punish your grandchildren individually for your individual sins. No. The concept of generational sin is not punishing 5-year-old Timmy because grandpa was a degenerate. That's not what generational sin means. It means that those sins will probably continue to be perpetuated. That's what that means. And so it's very anti-biblical to punish children for the crimes of their father. That's what killing a baby conceived in rape is. You're murdering a child for the crimes of their father. And here's the last thing I'll say on that, because I know we have other questions. Pro-lifers have far more compassion for the sexual victims of rape than the pro-choicers do, and I'll prove it to you. Most pro-choicers are on the left, right? Except for Tommy Lahren and these weird fake libertarian, fake conservatives, but anyway. Most pro-choicers, they're super on the left. Most pro-choicers are Democrats. Most pro-choicers support shorter prison sentences and springing criminals from the clink. If the last 2 years of BLM Antifa, if you steal less than $1,000, you won't even be arrested, blah, 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 all this madness. That's coming from the Democrat Party, obviously, so that's the left. Pro-choicers generally support that. What's my point? If we want to have compassion for the victim of rape, I want justice. You know how I want justice? I want his balls cut off. I'm not joking, actually. I would support legislation to castrate rapists, or life in prison. I would do life in prison. I actually wouldn't support the death penalty, which some people think is interesting, because I think that will incentivize the rapist to murder his victim. Because it's the same punishment, so he'll just get away with it, right? I mean, better to murder her after raping her and maybe not be found out than to let her stay alive and get the death penalty for raping her. So it actually incentivizes murderers to murder their rapists. So that's the reason I wouldn't support the death penalty in the case of rape. But life in prison and castration, perfectly happy to do that. We're doing a lot of that to children anyways. Might as well do it to the rapists. So the pro-choicer generally does not support life in prison sentences. So if you really want to prove how compassionate you are to the victim of sexual assault, punish the rapist. Don't spring him from the clink 2 years later to rape more women. So don't let the pro-choicer get away with telling pro-lifers that they're unfeeling and uncompassionate because they're forcing her to bear a demon seed. That's what they call the babies conceived in rape. They call them demon seeds. They're forcing her to raise that rape baby. No, we have far more compassion for that rape victim because we actually want to execute justice on the rapist, unlike you, who if you had your way, he'd be back on the streets in 1 year.
Yeah. On the incrementalist, just a real quick thought. If you look over the past 70 years, 80 years, something like that, what has the left done? That exact thing, right? And so I don't think we can get upset at people who are okay with taking a step-by-step approach to it, when in reality, that's how we've gotten into this situation in the first place. Like, why not throw it back?
Oh, and by the way, now that it's Roe v. Wade's overturned and we finally have the right we should have always had
to demand the laws we want on the books in the states we live in. It put the power back into the hands of the people. You better be holding your elective representatives accountable at the state level, because now you can ban abortion, and you better keep them accountable. And if you don't, you should primary every single one of them and get a godly man or woman elected who will ban abortion with no exceptions at the state level.
Here in North Carolina, we just elected a Republican Supreme Court. We've had a Republican Senate. We've had a Republican House. Come 2024, we're going to have the opportunity to elect a new governor. So that's why we're doing this year, is to educate, inspire, get involved, lay the groundwork here in 2023 so that come 24, we can move. We can make some moves.
Yep, that's right.
Next question. So let's talk about birth control. Should we be advocating for birth control to prevent abortion?
Yeah, so the left has told pro-lifers this for years, right? Have you guys heard this one? If you're really pro-life and you want less abortions, support more birth control. Don't you know, I got this study over here, follow the science, from the same organizations that say men can be women and women can be men and babies aren't persons. Follow the science. But you can really trust these studies, and that the COVID jab, it prevents infection or transmission. Nope, sorry, no, it doesn't. So all these studies, they'll quote to you, they largely come from the very institutions that have gotten everything wrong for decades. So, I mean, just come on, just have a little humility and just be able to say, maybe I can't trust everything that has the stamp of science on it. Anyways, so they'll say, look at the science-y thing here. It says that when you give everyone free condoms and you teach birth control classes in public high schools, the unwanted pregnancy rate plummets. So that's what they say. And so then they say, well, you're not really living out your pro-life convictions if you don't support that, because that reduces the unwanted pregnancy rate, which reduces the abortion rate. How could you be opposed to that? And a lot of pro-lifers, be honest, you might get stuck with that one, huh? You might go, I think we have a lot of reasons to kind of reject those studies. I won't get into the minutia right now, but consider this. Birth control ripped sex from its procreative telos. If you consent to sex, you consent to pregnancy. And I have leftists on university campuses, when I say that, they look at me like a deer in the headlights. They're like, what? It's like, no, literally, they're like, no, that's not true. To which I say, okay, well then eating Krispy Kreme for all 3 meals for 10 years is not consent to obesity. And they're like, you see in each circumstance there's a direct relationship between the action and the conclusion. So how did you get pregnant? I had one student tell me at UNC Charlotte yesterday, consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy, but consent to sex is consent to the possibility of pregnancy. And I was like, dude, that's the same thing. and he was like, no, it's different. It's like, okay. Tell that to the baby. I mean, what are you talking about? So consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, but what did birth control convince us of? That we could rip sex apart from its procreative telos. You know what telos is, the teleology? What's the purpose of something, right? So this thing only fulfills its telos if it keeps the water in it and satiates my thirst. If it falls everywhere, it has not fulfilled its telos. That's telos. So the purpose of sex is procreation. And anyone who tells you otherwise is smoking the devil's lettuce or the Haitian oregano or something like that. And so for decades now, we have been teaching and inoculating the public against God's design for sex and for orgasms without responsibility. At the end of the day, that is what is being espoused when they say consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy. They're saying, I have the right to orgasms without responsibility, but you don't. And this is why birth control, did you know it sometimes fails? And then there's a baby. Oh, I guess consent to sex is consent to pregnancy. So anyway, so what has that done to the cultural fabric? That's what I'm asking you to consider. It's convinced us that if we don't consent to pregnancy, we shouldn't have to consent to being parents. Hey, what the heck? I was on birth control, so I didn't consent to this child. So birth control put the culture of death on steroids and onward with the sexual revolution. So I think we have good reason to actually believe, not because of the science, but because I have two brain cells to rub together and I can observe human nature, that the abortion rate actually drives up. Because when you get pregnant with your own birth control, you're already thinking, I shouldn't have to be a parent. So you're more likely to therefore dehumanize the preborn child for abortion because you are already dehumanizing yourself through responsibility-free sex. That's why birth control is dangerous. I'm not telling you as a Christian that if you use a condom, you need to repent. I'm not ready to go full Catholic. But I will tell you this, church. We could learn a thing or two from the Catholic perspective against birth control. They're grounded in the natural law tradition and in teleology. So let me make the Catholic case for you as a Protestant. Here's the Catholic case. All forms of birth control are sinful and immoral because God made sex for procreation. And for you to treat it for anything else is itself sin because you're not fulfilling and living according to the Creator's design. That's the Catholic argument. I'll tell you what, I have more respect for that argument than for the widespread popularization of use in birth control in the church. Last comment, and typical, I'm very long-winded. Let me ask you one thing. Do you want more blessings in your life? Did you know Scripture calls money a blessing? Did you know it calls family a blessing? Did you know it calls friendships a blessing? Did you know it calls ownership and property blessing? The Bible calls lots of things blessings, amen? Children seem to be the only thing called blessings in the American church that Christians ask for less of. Wow. Let me say that again. Children are the only things the Bible calls blessings that Christians seemingly want less of in the church. All of those other things the Bible calls blessings, you want more of those, don't you? Don't you want more money? Don't you want more friends? More property? You want all of those blessings. And yet we work overtime and snip ourselves as men to try to tell God, when you said it is good, I said, but not anymore. Now, one of you are thinking right now, this guy's a kook. Because what he's espousing is that women should have as many children as biologically possible. That would be the counter argument, assuming my bad motivations. They would say, well, Seth, then what do we do? You have as many children as possible? No. Do you know any couples who had a kid immediately after they got pregnant and then didn't for 5 or 7 years? By raise of hands, does anyone know people like that? I do. I know multiple people like that. They were fertile myrtle with the first kid, and then they tried for years and nothing. Oh, maybe because God was involved in that process the whole time. And maybe just like you sacrifice your home, your family, your friends, and your finances to God, maybe you should start offering your sex life and your fertility onto the altar of his throne as well and asking him how he would want you to steward that thing called a blessing. That's a word the American church isn't ready for.
That'll mess you up. So, speaking of children, how do we have the conversation with our kids on how to be, like, why it's wrong, why abortion is wrong, and why we should stand up for it? Because it's graphic.
Yeah, amen. So I've got a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old. I would tell you to ask Brian Ottinger right here from Love Life USA, because he's got older kids than me, and he's frankly far more faithful in protecting the preborn outside of Moloch servile worship centers, otherwise called abortion centers, in the Charlotte area than I have ever been. So I would ask people who are really on the front lines taking their children outside the doors of death, where the spirit of Moloch is manifesting in Charlotte. They would probably be able to answer that question better than me. But I would simply say to teach them the full counsel of God, to teach them the scriptures, to wear it on their heads, to remind them of it when they walk in and when they walk out, when they rise and when they go to sleep. And just reminding children that this is a very evil world we live in. You don't have to say it's child mutilation to pagan demons and here's how they kill babies, 5-year-old son. Like, I'm not going to do that talk to my 5-year-old, but maybe when he's 10. And he stood outside of abortion centers with us, just in his coloring book in the stroller. But you can temper down your language, for your 5, 6, and 7-year-olds and say, some people love babies because they trust God that children are a blessing. Some people actually hate babies because they're really selfish. And rather than obeying God's commandments, they want to pleasure themselves at any means possible. And so just like you know, son, sometimes you're hard to take care of. But you're the biggest blessing in mom and dad's life. Well, some parents see it the other way. Because kids are hard to take care of, they'd rather get rid of their kids. I mean, there's ways you can explain it without explaining the process of dismemberment or poison. But if you really want, the crash course in having that kids, I talked to Brian Ottinger. Raise your hand, Brian. Sitting right here. Oh, yeah. Awesome. So I don't know if that helps, but just tell them that people have been killing people to improve their own lives for thousands of years. And then abortion is just another example of that.
I know some 30, 40, 50-year-olds in my life that could use that simple explanation.
Right. They've been drinking from the streams of liberalism too long. Huh?
Right.
Yeah.
Can you real quick, so we'll do a handful more questions. Can you reshare and expand on the sled argument?
Yeah. So this tour, the White Rose Resistance Tour, is about explaining the history of humanism and how the heck we got here and how we can get out. But when you dive into the minutia of the arguments, I'll do it in 60 seconds. From the moment of conception, there's the distinct living and whole human being. Distinct because it's a different gender. It can be a different gender than mom and have a different DNA code or a different blood type. It's living because it meets all the requirements for a living thing. Dead things don't grow, and the baby's developing themselves from within. And they're a whole human being because they have everything they need from the moment of conception to realize their full growth and development as a participating member of the human species, even if you can't see them yet. Philosophically, we argue that there's no value-giving difference between preborn people and born people that makes it okay to kill preborn people. In other words, any difference between you in the womb and you outside the womb are differences found amongst all born people as well. And those differences are summarized in the acronym SLED, S-L-E-D, size, level of development, environment, and dependency. Size, level of development, environment, and dependency. One more time if you're writing it down. Size, level of development, environment, and dependency. The baby's smaller, but men are generally larger than women. Shaquille O'Neal is not more valuable than Barbra Streisand. Level of development, yes, the baby is less developed than their parents, but newborn children are less developed than unborn children, and toddlers are less developed than infants and teenagers. Babies are less developed than toddlers. Toddlers are less developed than teenagers. We're all on a spectrum of human development, and that process began at the moment of conception. Environment or location. The baby's in a different environment or location. It's called the womb. By the way, the womb has become the most dangerous place for a human being to find themselves in America in 2023 today. You're more likely being murdered in the womb than you are residing or living in any dangerous city or crime-ridden slum. And it was created to be the place that you were protected and valued, so much so that pregnant women who have cancer often undergo chemotherapy, and in the vast majority of cases, the baby's actually born fine and perfectly flawless and unaffected by the chemo. Why? Because the uterus was created to protect you. And it's become the most dangerous place for a human being to find themselves. Also, isn't it interesting that the Democrat Party once said that blacks are the property of plantation owners whose land they live on, and now the same party says that babies are the property of their mothers whose bodies they live in. But where one is has no bearing on who one is, and when will we learn the stinking lesson that no human being is property? So size, level of development, environment, and dependency. Yes, the baby's dependent on the mother, but if that's the litmus test for human rights and value, then if you're dependent on heart pacemakers, kidney machines, insulin, life support, or caretakers, you're also a non-person and can be killed by the state. So those are the four differences between unborn people and born people, and notice how all of us share those differences amongst ourselves. So if those differences are justified to kill the preborn, then they can be used to justify killing you too. So that's what SLED means.
Yeah. So, talking about the White Rose Resistance, why do you think the white rose was chosen as the symbol of the resistance?
Yeah, I've actually studied this to some extent. My goal in the next 3 years is to become a worldwide expert on the White Rose Resistance and get international speaking requests from all around the world to talk about the White Rose Resistance. No, I'm serious. I'm not joking. Because the left actually loves to co-opt the White Rose Resistance to advance leftist causes. If you Google the White Rose Resistance, it'll be hard to find our Facebook page because we're being shadow banned like crazy. We're doing better on Instagram, but Facebook has become a freaking joke. But if you Google White Rose Resistance on Facebook, you will find a Facebook page called White Rose Resistance. We're called The White Rose Resistance, but you'll find one called White Rose Resistance with like 60,000 followers. It's a big leftist progressive political project. And they, like me, are saying that they're fulfilling the spirit of the White Rose Resistance by pushing Bernie Sanders' universal health care and abortion. So it's like, boy, did you really miss that script? Like, you couldn't have gotten that more wrong. Because they see, like, Sophie as the modern-day alternative of standing against, like, Trumpism or something. Like, that's how they view it, right? So it's important because it's very misunderstood. But also I think that providentially, it's one of the most powerful and least known stories from the Third Reich. Everyone knows the name Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Oskar Schindler, Schindler's List, right? We all know the name William Wilberforce. We all know the name Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, but almost no one knows the name Hans and Sophie Scholl. And so I think there's something about the story that touches people's hearts, because I think we want to think that we would have been like them. And their youth and the clarity with which they spoke and the fact that they would lay their lives on the line, I think when we hear that, we wish and hope that we would have done that. So as I say, we think Hans and Sophie brave and courageous because they sacrificed far more with far less freedom to stand against their Holocaust than we have ever done to stand against ours. What have you sacrificed, Christian, to stand against Satan's sacrament, the killing of children in the womb? What have you really sacrificed? What have I sacrificed? I've sacrificed some time away from family. I've sacrificed some friends who think I'm just a tool of the GOP and Trump or something stupid. I've sacrificed some brown hair that's being replaced by gray hair. I've sacrificed a 4-pack for a gut. I haven't had to sacrifice that much yet. And neither have you, actually. What kind of clarity and what kind of courage and what kind of spirit-filled person does it take to walk to their death and say, how can we expect righteousness to prevail? When there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up individually to a righteous cause and to say the sun still shines before your head is cut off. I think we wish that we would be like that. So my challenge to you this evening as we wrap up is to say, if you want to know if you would have been like Hans and Sophie in 1942 and 1943, if you want to know if you would have been like Bonhoeffer, if you would have been like William Wilberforce or Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass, the answer is the extent to which you engage the Holocaust of abortion today is the same extent to which you would have engaged those injustices then. Because they're all wrong for the same reason. In each circumstance, the state denied personhood and the protections therein to millions of people that they knew were human beings. They knew they were humans, but they were Lebensunwertensleben. They were useless eaters. They were unfit to live. They were undesirables. They were unwanted. But we all knew they were humans. What happens when being human is no longer enough to have rights? The elites and the political elites get to decide who gets to live and who gets to die. Remove Christianity from society, and new kooky pagan religions take its place. And they will be as gods. So if you can't sacrifice with your American freedom to stand against the slaughter of the preborn, we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, I would not have sacrificed to stand against slavery or the Holocaust then. That's kind of the hard word that I think the White Rose Resistance causes people to think about at a subconscious level.
Wow. So in closing, I want people to be able to connect with you and take some next steps. I like this question in the way it's phrased. What is your IG fam? That's a great question.
Does that mean Instagram?
That does mean Instagram.
Okay.
And fam, someone's very tight with you.
What is my IG fam?
What is your IG fam?
Oh.
That was the question. So what's your Instagram? Where can people follow you?
Oh, okay, man. Jeez, I guess I'm an old fart millennial now. It's just Seth Gruber official, but you will get a warning when you press follow, unless they got rid of it. It was there a few weeks ago. You press follow. Warning! Are you sure? This account has spread dangerous misinformation. Like, oh, you mean like the CDC and the FDA and the NIAID and the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security and Merrick Garland and the Democrat Party? who just admitted that everything they told you for the last 3 years, the opposite was true. I don't think the word misinformation means what you think it means. So Seth Gruber, official. Make sure you spell official right, because there's another group that spells it with 2 L's or something, and they're masquerading to be me. And Instagram won't give me the blue verified check mark so that people know which one's the real one, because they don't want people to. And then what was the
there's
other
some
question?
other resource. Like, where else can people
The
find you?
website is
and get engaged with you?
thewhiterose.life. And then if the media team could put up the White Rose QR code again, if anyone didn't get a chance to scan it, this will take you to our website if you want to learn more, thewhiterose.life. My podcast is Unaborted with Seth Gruber, because we're all unaborted. Or to quote Reagan, I've noticed everyone who's for abortion has already been born. And we have about 278 episodes now. We've had the founder of Love Life on the podcast. We've had Kirk Cameron, Nick Vujicic, Charlie Kirk, Rob McCoy, Jack Hibbs, talking about how we got here, how we get out of here, and some less known names, actually, on my podcast that are far more popular than my episodes with Kirk or Nick Vujicic. Like, I've found some true gems in the culture wars that I'm trying to, like, uplift and platform, because their knowledge of how we got here is freaking insane. So I'm just, like, soaking this stuff up, and I'm trying to, like, spit it back at you to wake people up. So that podcast is a really great resource. Unaborted with Seth Gruber. We're almost at 280 episodes. Go to iTunes Podcast, give us 5 stars, leave a review. We get a lot of nasty ones. It helps us reach more people. And then I have a YouTube channel that you can follow as well. We have lots of videos, and I would ask you to share our content. And if you want to get involved with the White Rose Resistance, shoot us an email through the website or reach out on social media. Because we're building an army of foot soldiers of the resistance that we're starting to train and mobilize, and that group will be our core group that we pull from when we start mobilizing volunteers at the grassroots level to actually push back against the culture of death. For only in action is freedom, to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So, thank
Awesome.
you, guys.
Well, hey, let's. You mind if we pray for you, and then we'll get going.
Thank you, guys.
Father, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you so much for Seth, for how you have empowered him, God, for such a time as this to bring life, God, where there is death. I just pray that you would continue to bless him, pour out your favor on him, Lord. And thank you for everyone that is here tonight, God, that they would be empowered, they would be emboldened to take a next step, God, and to get involved in the fight for life, involved in the fight for freedom, and involved in the fight to spread your gospel and to bring heaven on earth, Lord. So we love you, we honor you, and it's in your name that we pray. Amen. Awesome. Can we give it up for Seth?
Thank you.
And I will invite my lovely wife, Jordan, up to kick us off.
Awesome.
Finish us,
Thanks,
whatever.
everyone, for coming tonight. Just a few additional next steps. We'll have a QR code on the screen with just some more information. If you want to know about the upcoming ones, we've got some amazing this year. We're going to be doing them quarterly, and we've got some amazing guest speakers. We've got Dr. Frank Turk this year. We do have Charlie Kirk coming back this year, so if you want to know when he's coming and get the first information about that, this will be the way to get those dates. And then also just some next steps to engage in the pro-life movement here in Charlotte. We'll be doing 2 Love Life adoption weeks this year, and what that means is we'll be sharing on Sunday in church about what it means to be pro-life, what the fight is for, and then we'll be doing prayer walks at Latrobe Abortion Clinic here in Charlotte, which is actually the Southeast's largest abortion clinic. And so we want to go out there, want to pray over the women there that are going in and really see some lives changed. And then we also are a house of refuge here at Freedom House. And so what that means is we partnered with Love Life we provide mentors for women who are considering abortions and then ask for that mentorship or choose life. We have women and leaders at our church that walk alongside them. We're actually throwing 2 baby showers this Saturday for women that have chosen life. And so if you want to be involved in that aspect, in the shepherding of women that are considering abortions and then are choosing life. Felicia is your gal. Raise your hand, Felicia. She's our House of Refuge leader. And so we'll be sending out, if you fill out this QR code, we'll also be sending out an email with all of these next steps, including all of Seth's resources, because we don't want you to feel overwhelmed with the next steps or resources, but we want you to just find 1 or 2 that you can take, that you think, oh, I can do this. I can help with a baby shower. I can help with a prayer walk. I can help with White Rose Resistance, and really take those actions like we talked about tonight. So I think that's everything we've got.
One more quick thing. Everyone say March 28th.
March 28th.
Everyone say March 28th.
March 28th.
There is an event that is going on that my good friend Caroline Winchester knows way more about. Raise your hand, Caroline. With the Queen City Pregnancy Resource Center, is that correct? Night for Life. So if you're, that is something that's very soon that is happening. So if you want more information about the Night for Life with the Queen City Pregnancy Resource Center, Caroline is your girl. She'll be standing out here or in the lobby. Find Caroline. And she can get you connected for a great event to get involved here locally. So we have a lot going on, a lot coming up. You want to dismiss us?
Yeah. So that's everything. Like we said, Seth will be out in the lobby. We'll have merch and some more information on White Rose. And we'll see you next time.
Have a great night.